So, hello, welcome to another episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, Alan Wyma. Today we have the wonderful Dr. Jenna Lipenkova. She is the author of Art of AI Product Development. Welcome, Janna. How are you?
Hello, it's very nice to be here. I'm good, thank you, and looking forward to this.
Yeah, I was interested because we've been covering so many AI topics recently because of our relationship with Manning, and that's also kind of like the hot topic for the past 2 years or year and a half or so.
I think it has been since the launch of ChatGPT in
Yeah.
2022, right? And now
Oh
everybody
my
is
goodness.
doing AI suddenly.
Yeah, everybody's doing AI, and like basically, if you don't do AI, then people are just not interested. For me, I'm mostly AI'd out because I have good hopes for it, but I've also had some interesting experiences with it. I think I don't know, I've seen about 20 or so AI presentations, and about maybe 2 or 3 of them were actually successful, which is kind of weird. Maybe I just have bad luck. Where like somebody's like, okay, and they type into a prompt and say, okay, generate me this project, and then it came out like broken. And then they're like, well, actually, I already prepared a backup. And then they had a backup that was actually working. They said, oh, yeah, I swear it works. I'm like, okay, maybe. But I don't want to, trash on AI. I think it was just, sometimes AI has got like, don't they have something called like, there's a variance to it, I believe. I forgot what the word is, but it's basically you can type the same thing into AI and you're going to get different responses. And that's like by design that there's like some kind of variance between the different generations, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's called temperature in some
Yeah.
models, right? So basically, the model can choose different words and different tokens for the same prompt at different trials. But I think you mentioned a very good point, right? That out of the 20 demos that you saw, only 3 were successful. And I have a similar statistic, which is that, so that's numbers by Rand Corporation in the US, and also McKinsey has published similar numbers, that 80% of the AI initiatives in companies, they eventually fail, right? So they don't make it into production and then lasting adoption, right? So it's kind of a similar statistic at a more strategic and higher level, but I think there are many things to talk about just to, and to understand before you actually master AI and can deploy it successfully.
Well, I'm happy to hear that because I've been talking to other people and I tell them my experience and they're like, "Oh, you must be joking," or "You have bad luck," and I'm like, "I don't know. I feel like I've had bad luck because everybody around me is just saying, "Oh, it's great. This is you can do this, you can do that, you can just vibe your way into
Yes.
like the perfect product," and I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I've tried a bit, and myself even I haven't had the best of luck." And then sometimes I do have good luck, and it's just the inconsistency has me worried because
Mm.
usually I type into the prompt and I know what I want to do, but I type to the prompt like in cursor and it has to think for a long time. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like by the time thing's done thinking, I could have just basically done all the work myself. I think I saw a recent article that actually said this. It's something like most developers have the same feeling, is that by the time it gets done actually generating and thinking and doing all the work, that you probably could have done it yourself, or even a better job sometimes. It just depends, right? I think last time I've seen there's like AI generated code is as good as like a junior developer. I think was something I saw a while ago. It may have improved. I mean, what do you have to say about this? Since we're already on this topic.
Yeah, I think you're now coming to vibe coding. It's one of my favorite topics at the moment because we have a lot of fun with it. So that's one thing. But it works very well. So all those, coding agents like Replit, Devin, V0, and so on, they work really well for things like prototyping, maybe even for setting up a code base, right? If your application is not too complex. But if you have a legacy system or an existing code base and you want to add on top of it, then it actually becomes really tricky. So the one thing is that the model needs to understand your existing code base, right? And then it needs to continue kind of coding in the same style. And that's tricky. And also with prototyping, so what we see is that, the farther down the road you get, so the later you are in the process, the more inefficient you get with those models, right? Because they start making mistakes in the context of the code base, and then you need more and more time to debug. And it just gets pretty inefficient. And I also want to mention those recent pricing changes that we have been seeing for many of the vibe coding tools, so including V0, including Replit, and I think also Claude Code had a recent pricing change. And that was kind of a shock for many developers also, because then what you have been doing in the past, right, suddenly it becomes not sustainable anymore, just from a financial standpoint.
I mean, that's probably why you have to have your employer pay for that if they can. I know there's some companies doing that. So if you're lucky, you can. I don't know. I'm on the fence about it. I think sometimes it works, sometimes not. And you talked about like as the farther along you get, it gets harder to do, and that's probably because like the context window has to be larger. You have to get more of the project in there. Like ChatGPT, I believe the GPT stands for General Purpose Transformer or something like that. So it's not necessarily towards programming or even after you get such some time, you actually need more like domain knowledge, I think, right? When you start to really develop your product some more. So it's not just, can I code this like this? Can I also code in a way that makes sense? Is that correct?
Yes, of course. So one thing is that it needs to make sense, and all the more to make sense in the context of your own code base, right? So that's this kind of custom thinking that you need from the agent. The other one is that, ChatGPT, generative pre-trained transformer, right? It has been trained on a lot of text data. There is also some code data that has gone into it. I think there is things like Stack Overflow, for example. But then models like the model behind Cursor, behind V0, and so on, they have been trained on a lot of code data also. Now, so they have seen a lot of code in their training time, right? But the problem is that the code that they have seen, it's not always optimal code. It doesn't always follow the best practices, right? So it's kind of the average code. And that's why what you are saying, that the code then has the quality of, let's say, junior developer code, it's actually true, right? So yeah, in our case, we really have been trying to use it more for the simple task, maybe to write some boilerplate code, but all the kind of code that contains our know-how. So our know-how is in AI and data analytics, right? That's something that we either write manually or we write it with the help of AI, so with the assistance of AI. But in that case, we are that sure just to check every line of the code that it has written, right? And then there are also some tasks like, all those tasks that developers are normally a bit lazy to do, like writing documentation, for example, right? That can actually also work pretty well with AI. And then, I mean, we haven't been into this for a very long time, right? So for now, it's just a couple of months of vibe coding experience in the team, but I also foresee that maybe not with the way the tools are built currently, right? But in the future, I also actually foresee that the AI will be able to build a brain about the code base that you have, right? So from all the specifications, which are very important, right? The code that is written, the documentation, and so on. And then if you get to this point, it might actually become much easier to then also extend your code base, your existing code base, even if it's large, based on this brain that the AI has built. Yeah. And I mentioned this point of specifications, right, which are gaining more and more importance, because basically, if you have a good specification for the AI, so let's say about the functionality of the code, you might specify how the UX should look like, right? You might even input some of the business related requirements. Then it's something that makes you, provided that the tool works well, right? It's something that makes you very efficient and flexible, because you can basically just use the specification and input it into any coding agent, maybe into all those AI assisted UX tools and so on, right? So basically the whole know-how that you have, it kind of goes into the specification and not into the code anymore, right? So your IP is in the specification, it's not so much in the code anymore. But I know it's a controversial point, especially for developers, of course, which value, the quality of the code a lot. But I think it's something that will converge over time.
We just kind of start getting into topics. We didn't even get to who are you? Do you mind to do kind of a quick introduction about, who you are, your background? And obviously you're which I must give some applause to, you're a doctorate, right? So it may be interesting to hear I'm not sure if your doctorate is involved with AI or not, but I don't know. It would be interesting to hear what you're a doctor of.
Sure. I am a doctor of computational linguistics. So I did my PhD in computational linguistics in 2015. And computational linguistics is kind of the academic counterpart of natural language processing, right? So I did it basically from 2010. That's when I got into AI. So it was during my master thesis. And then I finished it in 2015. And Alan, yes, my major, it was in Chinese studies. So it was before the PhD. And actually the PhD was also on natural language processing for the Chinese language. So that's why I have some mastery of Chinese also. And after that, I've been working in many different industry projects, so on all different kinds of language technologies. So there was chatbots, there was machine translations, there was apps for learning languages, and many other things, right? So really, I really wanted to collect this kind of broad experience in working with languages from the technological point of view. And then I founded two companies in a row which are based on the same technology. So basically, they use algorithms and AI to collect large quantities of data from the web and then to analyze them for market intelligence purposes for big companies, right? So one topic that we address is technological innovation companies. So basically, we'll collect a lot of the scientific publications, technological publications about those technological topics that are relevant to a company, right? And then we will extract relevant insights from them, like what are the trends, what are the relevant technological developments for this company specifically, which kind of recommendations could we give to the company so it can implement them in their own innovation strategy. And the second vertical is sustainability, which, as you might know, is also getting more and more important in companies. So at the moment, we have a lot of new regulations and regulatory pressure for companies to get more sustainable. But then it's also a topic, just like innovation, right? So which is changing a lot, and it's also not so tangible and it's not so familiar to companies, which are normally very much focused on profitability, right? So then for them, we will also monitor the competitive landscape, the regulations, and so on, and basically produce recommendations on what they can do to improve their own sustainability performance. And yeah, most of it kind of goes back to those things that I did during the PhD, because it's all about text data, about natural language data, which is unstructured data, and is always very exciting to analyze. So we have been analyzing structured data for, I don't know, decades, right? So that's something that companies already master very well, and there are all those existing systems for it. But obviously, when it comes to unstructured data, text data, also multimodal data like images, videos, and so on, things get so much more fuzzy and interesting. But yeah, that's and I think it's also important to understand that. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows it, right? But I think that most companies, they have gotten AI on their radar in 2022, right? So with the launch of ChatGPT, but actually AI has existed decades before, and companies have been applying it for, I think, at least 2 decades also in production, right? So we have if you look at Google, they have their spam filters, they have their search, they have recommendations, and so on, right? So all those features, they're also based on AI. And it was a funny moment for me with ChatGPT, because before, we had to kind of go out, look for clients, tell them what we're doing, what is AI, why do they need it, what are the benefits, and so on. But then suddenly, so many companies just try to jump on that train, right? So on that kind of AI hype. So it became much easier for us also to acquire projects, to acquire them on the one hand, but then actually implementing them was not always so easy, because we often saw that there was some kind of misalignment in the companies and between stakeholders about what AI actually is, how they should use it, and so on. So actually, I have to say that this whole process of implementing the projects, I think there was some added friction in it, right? Once AI became this big hype.
Okay, no, that's interesting. And I guess now, like you said, with everybody kind of knowing what is AI and seeing it everywhere, people start to have some kind of idea. But do they really have an idea? Because when I talk with people, they seem to think that AI can do everything and anything and nothing stopping it, which I don't necessarily think that could be true. I mean, because I think you remember Google images, or Google spit out some really crazy images that they had some problems with, and lots of other weird stuff that was coming out, at least initially. And even nowadays, right, you're going to get some weird, strange output. We were just talking about, using prompt engineering to kind of generate code, and it's not exactly what you want. What's your take on that?
Um, well, I definitely agree that there is a lot of hype and a lot of, let's say, inflated expectations about AI. And I think it's due to the media, obviously, on the one hand, right? Because companies are just blowing, kind of, inflating what they're doing. They're inflating certain narratives, like, that full scale automation is possible, right? Also, this narrative about AGI, right? That AI will eventually kill all of us, right? So there is a lot of this kind of inflated reporting in the media. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is also that there is kind of an illusion of accessibility today, right? So all of us can just have access to ChatGPT, to Perplexity, to many other very powerful AI models, right? And so that's for the lay people. And then for developers, of course, we get access to all those wonderful coding tools. We can call the models via API, which means we can integrate them just into our applications and so on. So kind of gives us this illusion that, okay, everyone can use AI. But AI has clear limitations, right? So for example, hallucinations in ChatGPT, or let's say things like data cutoffs that the models normally have, don't have access to very fresh data. So that's just one example of limitation, right? And you need to know how to handle those limitations. And I think that that's something that not everyone knows at the moment, right? And for me, that's also one big reason for these frequent failures of AI projects and initiatives. It's that it's very easy to build a prototype, to build a demo, maybe even have some uh, pre-made prompt for the demo, and you're sure that it works. Um, but then once you really want to get it into production and you want to make it work for many different users, and you can't control their behaviors, you can't know what kind of prompt they will input into the app, it's kind of a whole different game, right? Because then you really need like very solid mechanisms in place for gathering user feedback, for iterating very fast at a very fast pace over your system. You need to have a data flywheel that kind of reinforces the good performance of the system and so on. And that's really a whole different game. So if you need, like, let's say maybe you need 1 week or 2 weeks for a prototype, and then you will show it to management and they will kind of be very excited about it, and your team is also very excited about it. But then you jump into this active development phase, right? And you want to plan for production and adoption. What we often see is that basically that phase can be so much longer and can eat up so much more resources than initially planned, right? And with that, you lose momentum, you lose credibility, and you generally lose also this kind of trust into AI or the excitement about AI in the company.
We kind of drifted away from kind of where I wanted to go, which was actually a little bit more so about like the book itself, right? Because you do talk about a lot of stuff that I think is important that people kind of skip. They skip some beginning steps, and I'm sure you've seen that with your work and why you wrote the book. Because people just say, okay, I'm just going to type into this thing what I want, rather than saying, okay, I want a specific product. I want to integrate AI into it. Let me think about this and actually make sure that I'm not just adding AI just to add in AI. I'm actually doing something useful with it that actually provides a good use. Maybe we can talk more about, like I said, why write this book, and more so, what does the book actually go into?
Sure. So I started writing the book, I think it's 1.5 years ago. And that was exactly the motivation, right? That in 2022 or 2023, we had a lot of client requests for different kinds of consulting projects. Well, it was actually not so different because most of them wanted to have some kind of chatbot, and then it switched to RAG system, and then suddenly it switched to agents, right? So that was kind of the evolution of the requests that we had. And it was so we were seeing kind of those misconceptions and misalignments in the teams that would just repeat themselves, right? So one of them, and I think that's a very crucial point, you also mentioned it, is that companies, they kind of jump on an AI feature, so like implementing a chatbot, without actually doing this groundwork of having a strategy in place or some idea of a strategy, because your strategy cannot be mature before you actually started working with AI. And then also doing the discovery, right? So really finding an existing business problem to which AI is actually the perfect solution, right? So that's the groundwork that you need to do before you actually go into implementing your AI system. So that's just one example, but I think it's a big one of those misconceptions, or let's call it pitfalls or mistakes that we saw in companies. Then, of course, also many topics about development, right? So in the book, there is a very large part about development, right? So there are several chapters that are dedicated to generative AI, how to prompt, how to build RAG systems, how to build agentic systems. There is also a section about predictive AI, which is still the basis, I would say, for most of current production systems, right? So things like, how do I classify text or objects? How can they cluster them? How can they analyze time series, and so on? And then there is also a big part about AI adoption and integration, right? So that's, for example, one major topic there is the user experience of AI products. What we often see with companies or teams is that they will focus very much on those, like the technical things, right? So let's say like choosing a model or choosing a framework or some kind of agent tool and so on. But then they will actually neglect how that, the outputs of this model and so on, how it's actually perceived to the user, and also how it can be like represented in the best way in the user experience. So I think that's a topic that's really often kind of overlooked, right? So because now we also have this trend towards having chat everywhere, so conversational user experiences everywhere, but obviously it's not the optimal solution for everything. So for example, when we do a lot of market intelligence and data analytics, then for us, sometimes just old school plain data visualizations are the best solution, right? On the other hand, if you want to give the users like very flexible and very versatile access to the data that we have in the backend, then of course we will tend to have a conversational user experience or a hybrid user experience where we just mix conversation and then those structured data visualizations. So that's one adoption topic. Then the other one is, of course, about governance and things like privacy, ethics, security, and so on, because that's also something where we see like a lot of internal challenges for our teams, right? So you have an engineering team or a product team which can be very excited about the new development and they jump straight into it, but then the compliance department comes and has a lot of questions and they are not necessarily able to reply to all those questions in a satisfactory way, right? So that's why in the book there is also a longer chapter on AI governance. So basically that was the idea to kind of show this whole path from the discovery at the beginning, so identifying the most valuable business problems for AI through development and then up to adoption, right? And I think that's something that companies also lack at the moment because there is a lot of content and the space is changing very quickly and it's really difficult to have this kind of holistic view that would also allow you to not just implement some kind of ad hoc feature or use case, but eventually really also move into the direction of a real AI strategy.
Well, I'm happy that you brought up about like the compliancy stuff because I think a lot of people don't really think so much about that. What I hear a lot of people talk about is, oh, let's hook AI into everything, and then we have our customers can access their data, blah blah. But it's like, wait a minute, you can't just hook it into everything because there's some things that you don't want to share with them, right? You have to be able to compartmentalize things, right? You don't want the AI like for this specific customer, for this specific user, you don't want them to have access to say like how much profit are you making from them or something like that. You don't want them to know because maybe they want to negotiate with you, right? You start to kind of lose some balance on here, but or even knowledge about your other customers or whatever, right? Or even a potential what's the word? Competitor. If they can start getting information that you don't compartmentalize properly, like that's a huge problem. How do you design systems so that way specific people will get the data, or at least will let the AI get access to specific data that they actually should have, even within a company, right? You don't want everybody to have all kinds of data. Like you don't want to know. Maybe some companies they don't like to share like how much salary the person next to you is making, right? This kind of stuff. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that because that is super important. I'm just surprised more people don't talk about that.
Normally in companies, right, we have data classification and we have access rights and so on. And so far we have been used to this idea that, okay, different people can look at different kinds of data, right? And they have access to different kinds of data. And now, as you say, we have this whole new dimension that now it's not just people looking at the data and working with the data and maybe even changing or modifying some data, but actually the AI can also do that, right? And I think that many of the things that or those mechanisms like data classification by confidentiality levels, right, that worked before, they can also be carried over. Of course, in a modified way, they need to be reviewed and so on, but they can also be carried over into AI system. So, but it's something that you need to be aware of from the beginning, right? So when we kind of plan for an AI system with our clients, that's long before the development actually starts. We normally also consider those constraints on governance, compliance, privacy, and so on, right? So that's something very important that you really, especially in a B2B context, right, that you're aware of those things upfront because they will then influence your architectural decisions, your model decisions, and they can turn into showstoppers if you don't consider them. Now, in terms of the technical implementation, so today we have, so most of the AI systems that we build today, they are, it's not just like, one single model, right? So kind of this monolithic thinking, and then this model will get access to all kinds of data that you have in the company. Normally, the systems, they are modular, so they're so-called compound AI systems, right? So you will have a model, and then the model. So, for example, like it would work in a RAG system, so retrieval augmented generation system. There is a long chapter on RAG systems in the book, so if people are interested, please go and check it out. But then what you basically have is that you have a model and it has access to different data sources in your company, right? So it can be just one database, which is actually the most common scenario, but then you can also give it access to different kinds of data sources, and those data sources can also have different kinds of confidentiality levels. And then the model will get the relevant data to a given user query from those databases or from those data sources, right? And basically it will build up its response based on this data. And then, of course, if you have user management and you know who the user is, then you can also just code this into the whole system that for a user X, the model has access to database A, and for a user Y, it has access to database B and maybe database C, and so on. So with those modular systems, it becomes quite it's doable to manage access rights and to manage those confidentiality levels. But as said, it really needs to be counted in the architecture from the beginning. Otherwise, you will just, like drop into a big rabbit hole. And if you try to fix these things post hoc, then it's very inefficient and it can also be dangerous, right? Because then chances are high that you will only discover them once data has leaked or people have gotten unauthorized access to the data. Right. And then the other thing is, of course, that for the models, so we have commercial models or API-based models like most OpenAI models, like the Anthropic models, and so on. And these are really the mainstream, right? And in that case, basically your data goes outside the company. And then on the other hand, you also have open source models that you can host yourself, right? So examples are Llama, Mistral, you can also host DeepSeek, and so on. And then if you host them on your own infrastructure, you can, of course, make sure that the data doesn't go out of the companies, right? So that's just one of the advantages of the open source models. There are many others, but the disadvantages are it's just so much more demanding in terms of engineering, right? So you need to have the engineering skills to deploy them. You need to have the infrastructure to deploy them. The models come in different sizes, right? So for example, for Llama, we have 8B up to 70B. So that's my current my current recollection of it. And then normally companies say, okay, let's just deploy the smaller variant. But then what happens is that the smaller models, they're very, very impractical and not so performant at free form tasks like conversation, right? You can use them for some more restricted tasks. You can also fine tune them. But normally, if you really want to kind of implement this full-blown conversational experience as we are used to it from ChatGPT and Co, then you need to go with the bigger models, and they're very demanding, right? So I would say that these are probably the biggest engineering challenges. And then, of course, there is so much research and effort now also into speeding up the inference of the models, because normally there are much, depending on the infrastructure that you use, of course, right? But inference and how fast the model is at inference, right? So this latency, which is let's say one of the critical factors of the user experience, it's still a major issue for engineering.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot there. But I did want to cover something that's extremely important to mention, I believe, at the beginning of the book, or at least should be at any project, which is about like the planning, right? We talked a little bit about it, but I just really want to get into like how important the planning is, and maybe you have like is there a way that you can condense a way that people should start to kind of plan their projects? Like first they know they want to integrate AI somehow, but how should we do that? I mean, we talk about a little bit like don't just add AI for the sake of AI, but how should we actually plan adding AI into a project at the beginning?
Yes, I think that's a very critical and central question, right? So when you start out basically about identifying kind of the best use cases for your product or for your business that you can solve with AI. So for us, that's an important part in the discovery process, right? And well, how you do it in like classical product management, right, is that you have a lot of normally you have a lot of feedback and a lot of information sources, and from those you can already get a very clear idea about the opportunities that you can address in your product, right? And then you basically look into the solution space and you try to find the technical solutions to those issues, right? So let's say that maybe we have so let's say we're building a market intelligence application, right? And then we want to do, so we see that our customers, they need pricing comparisons, right? So they need to go on the different websites of the competitors and then basically to identify their prices for certain products and to show them in a dashboard. And I think that many companies today, they would say, okay, that's, there's a lot of data, you need analytics and so on, so let's use AI, right? But actually it's not really necessary because most of this data is structured data and you can do it in a much lighter weight form and a much more, let's say, deterministic form without all the mistakes and all the complexity behind it, just using some standard scraping plus data analytics algorithm. Another example, let's say you have a customer need, like the customers get a lot of data and now they want to generate reports for management or for other stakeholders in their company, right? So really reports with nice text blocks, which are also aligned with the strategy of the company and so on. So in that case, it's actually very much worth considering AI, because AI, if you want to speed up content generation and text generation, then AI is probably your best bet, right? You can't really do that with a traditional deterministic software. And that's exactly the thing, right? So at the beginning, you really need to kind of open up the field of opportunities, of customer needs, of customer desires, and so on. And then you need to see, okay, where is AI a good solution? That's how it normally works in PM, in product management, right? Now, what we have seen with our clients, it's exactly as you say, right? So we go to the client and they have this kind of idea fix, let's use AI, right? So it's kind of an AI first thinking. And with that, of course, you are very much risking running into this dilemma of using AI for the sake of AI, right? So just building another chatbot would be an example. So what we have done is basically that for those clients that have this idea of let's just use AI for something, right? We have so our ideation process for them is then focused around the inherent technological benefits of AI. Let me just show you this real quick because we have a very clear mental model for this, which is called the AI opportunity tree, right? So here you can see that it basically define a couple of buckets for AI opportunities, right? So it starts with things like automation and productivity, which is mainly about making existing tasks or processes more efficient with AI, right? So that's kind of the no-brainer, the low-hanging fruit that everybody wants because it allows you to save time, it allows you to save cost. And then in addition, those tasks, they're also in many cases let's say, much easier to implement from a technical perspective, right? So this would be things like automating 80% of your customer service requests, or maybe in a financial service or in a banking environment, it would be about analyzing a large quantity of data and trying to pick out those potential fraud cases or anti-money laundering cases, right? You're still sure that you have a human that will look over the results, but still this groundwork of kind of, pre-processing and maybe also structuring and analyzing a large quantity of data, it's basically delegated to the AI. So that's the first bucket. Then the second one is about improvement and augmentation. So that's more about we have an existing process. We don't want to automate it with AI, but we want to support it and improve the quality with AI. So for me, I think content generation is probably the best example, right? Because normally, if you care about high quality content, you will not delegate it completely to the AI, but you will use AI to kind of maybe brainstorm ideas, maybe help you polish the text, and so on. And then we talked about vibe coding at the beginning and AI assisted code generation. So I think that would also fall into this bucket. Then we have innovation. So that's really about like a more, let's say, radical transformation about in your business, right? So how can you really create new products and maybe the new business models with AI, right? For example, by automating really a lot of the stuff that your customer service is doing, and then you kind of, can employ these people to do some things in the organization on a different level. And then we have personalization. So that's also a very powerful feature of AI, right? That we know it from the recommendation engines. They don't always work well, right? So things like YouTube, Netflix, and so on. But basically, AI allows you to customize the outputs of an algorithm or recommendations to an audience of one or any kind of a very small audience, right? And that's something that you normally cannot achieve manually or with deterministic software. So these are the primary benefits in the B2B context in which we are in mostly. So most of the AI opportunities, they will fall into one of these four buckets. And then we have those, what we call secondary benefits. So these are things like convenience benefits, maybe emotional benefits, and so on, that also add on to the user experience. But so far, for me, I haven't seen many products where they would kind of constitute the core of the value proposition, right? So these are more the add-ons. So that's the AI opportunity tree. Let me show you how an example would look like. So that would be an example in financial services, right? Just an excerpt of an AI opportunity tree, a mock-up that we did for a client. And here you can basically see, okay, automation, productivity, we have customer service, fraud detection, and so on. And under each of these buckets, you identify several opportunities. So that's how you can open up your field of use cases, features, and so on. And then, of course, after that, you need to go into a closer planning process and specification process. So for that, we use this AI system blueprint. Basically, for each of the use cases that you've identified, you will then kind of build a full blueprint, which considers the data, the models, the algorithms, the user experience, as we said, the governance and the compliance constraints, right? And then, of course, it will map all those solution components also to the opportunity space, so the use case, how you specify it, and then the value that AI can contribute to that use case, right? So you build this blueprint, and then the next one would be really to kind of fill it with life. And that's something that we do then by exploring the AI solution space, right? Which is much wider than many companies think. So for many teams, right? So for many teams, we see that their vision of the AI solution space, it kind of corresponds to a couple of models that they have access to, or maybe some more general concepts like, agents, RAG systems, and so on. But actually the AI approach, the solution space of AI is so much wider. And that's something we always also emphasize with our clients, that you really need to go beyond the hype, also look into the basics like like symbolic AI, like predictive AI, and so on, and then see how you can mix all of these together to build the optimal solution, right? And then, so this already gives you a good mapping to your business opportunities on the one hand, and then also a good blueprint that your engineers can then start working with. And then during the development, so in terms of the planning, normally we try to keep it very, let's say, agile and iterative, right? So that's represented here in this iterative development process model. Basically, what we always emphasize is that it's super important to get to the first baseline of your system very quickly and very soon, right? And then all your focus should actually be on the iteration. So on continuously evaluating your system, right? And then optimizing it. So collecting feedback, collecting data from your users or from your team if it's not yet in production, and then basically looking at all the different optimization tools. So it can be algorithmic tools, it can be just about improving the data, it can be about adding more components to the system, right? So you really need to get into this habit of continuously iterating over your AI system, right? It's for many teams, it's a paradigm shift, right? Because most engineering teams, they work up to production, right? And then, of course, they will maintain the system, they will keep the lights on and so on, but still their focus will shift away to some other project. And in AI, it's actually different, right? So once you get this first baseline out, then actually the real work and all those things that actually demand your know-how, they really start.
I like these the charts and everything that you have. It's pretty cool. So this is your company website, right? It's AIstrategypartners.com. We'll make sure we'll put a link in the notes. The book name again, I'm just gonna put your picture up just so we have it over here, is The Art of AI Product Development. It's from Manning's, and we'll be sure to again put that into the show notes. Do you have any like last parting thoughts you want to give to people before we sign off?
I think we have mentioned a lot of critical points in the conversation, right? So this gap between prototyping and production, then this the unfortunate statistics so far. But I think it's super important for companies to start earlier, right? Even if you cannot do everything with AI today, and even if many things will probably not work, like you would ideally expect them to work, you still need to build up your know-how in the organization, right? So that can be about the engineering side and the implementation and development side. It can be about the business understanding of AI, and it can also be about kind of the whole upskilling in your organization, right? So that's something that we also always emphasize with clients. Even if you build the best AI system, right, but your users don't know how to use it, how to calibrate their trust, and so on, then its value is very limited, right? So I think it's super important that companies have a plan not just for developing AI, but also for this kind of company-wide AI adoption and strategy building. So that's why, start early and be very iterative and really learn on the go. Otherwise, you just risk, if you just wait until the models are perfect, they will never be, but let's say that at some point they will converge, right? But if you just wait for this moment of perfection and total safety behind AI outputs and AI systems, then you're really risking like being very late to the party, right? When your competitors have already built their baselines, they have built their AI habits, they have built like solid AI know-how and so on. So that's why I think it's very important to get into this mindset of learning and also experimentation about AI.
Okay, great. And with that, again, Janna, thank you so much for coming on talking about your book. And hopefully we'll have you back on again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.